this evening. Hopefully we'll have a really good, productive discussion. And I just want to start by introducing our moderator, George Murray, and thank him very, very much for managing the question flow. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
And with that, I will turn it over to you.
All right. I usually get asked to be a moderator or something, so I have to keep my mouth closed and can't ask all the questions. So I'm delighted for the opportunity, though, and I did bring my own notebook so I can take copious notes because I'm planning to learn a lot tonight, and hopefully you will as well. So we have 3x5 cards available if you'd like to write a question down. If you want to ask the question, obviously, just raise your hand and feel free to ask it without writing it down. We have a few that were emailed to Al, and we'll intersperse those as we go along so that we try to get everybody's questions answered. The focus tonight is on general firearms information, firearms safety, and the current laws that exist in Massachusetts. And by stating it that way, we're asking that we not get into advocacy and what should be the law and what shouldn't be the law and, you know, questions like that. This is really about information sharing, and we want to get as much out there for people as possible. So as the phrasing goes here, try not to distract the panel with questions about pending or withdrawn policies and proposed legislation. I'd like to go the length of the panel and ask people to say a word about themselves by way of introduction, just so you know who we're dealing with tonight. And Rick, you want to start? We'll just work our way down.
My name is Rick Cooper. I'm certified by the National Rifle Association and the Massachusetts State Police as a basic firearms safety instructor. I also have a degree in English from the University of Massachusetts. So I know to keep an eye on the people who choose to sit in the back of the room. I've taught English down in Woburn for over 30 years.
My name is Deborah Grumbach. I've lived here in town for 13 years. I'm a wife, a mom, and a business owner. I'm also a certified safety instructor, and that's about it.
Well, my name's Al Prescott. I'm also a certified firearm safety instructor. I've been a lifelong resident of Massachusetts. During the day, I'm a biomedical scientist, and I own a small business that develops regenerative technologies to treat pain and disease. And in my spare time, beyond shooting and whatnot, I'm also an amateur athlete. I've done an iron distance triathlon and the 4.5-mile swim across the Chesapeake Bay. So fun stuff.
My name is Tom McEnany. I cannot do a triathlon. I am the chief of police, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions regarding the license to carry.
Tim Whitcomb, Operations Administrator for the Police Department. I've been here for about 20 years, and why I'm here, I oversee the department that initializes this process as far as getting a license as the intake end of it.
All right, thank you all. And again, just by way of introduction, I'm George Murray. I'm a 42-year blow-in to Westford, and lived in one house the whole time, so I think we're going to be here until they carry us out feet first. I'm not sure. But lifelong hunter, not very successful, but a lot of fun. Lifelong gun owner, and obviously have a great interest in the subject as well. So again, that's why I'm delighted to be here. Let me start with one of the questions that were on the 3x5 cards, because I think it may be actually one leads into the other. How does one become trained, certified / licensed to purchase firearms? I.e., what is the complete procedure and cost of licensing, etc.? Chief, you want to take a stab at that?
For purchasing a firearm, there is a purchasing permit. It's good for 10 days, believe it or not. Cost over $100, and it's usually coupled with a firearms identification card. But we don't really see too many people applying for that in Westford. We primarily see the license to carry.
So the process to get your license to carry, which is probably what more people are used to, you have to take a home firearms safety course or basic pistol course. After that, you apply within your town. It costs $100 to apply. And what do classes run? Did you say right about now?
Well, the one that we run through the road and bush is $80 for residents of town, and the converter frontal on for another $10. As far as other classes, I don't know what other instructors charge, but
Yeah, and then you have to go through $100, yeah, so then the process of actually obtaining your LPC, you have to be fingerprinted and photographed, and they run a background check. And, right now, in this town, it's taking, how long?
Too long, but not by our doing. We average, well, Timmy can give you the numbers, but we average about 1 day for our turnaround before pushing that stuff out, which is, we have 7 days to do it, but by statute, and then it's supposed to go to the state, and it's a 30-day turnaround by the state before it gets to us. We're not seeing that, and I know there are a lot of people that are frustrated about that turnaround time and getting licenses. We have this down pretty well as far as getting the information in and getting it out. We put our people on a spreadsheet with a counter on it, and it has a day counter on it, how long the average licenses are taking. Tim, can you go through the average?
Somewhere around January, we realized that we were gonna be inundated with an increase. We really looked at our process and started doing by appointments. We didn't originate that idea, we looked at what everyone around us was doing. So we started taking license applications by appointment only. Once we started doing that, our turnaround time for processing was really taking us 1 day, because she's doing them right now behind us. And you'll come in, you fill out your application, or the application comes in filled out, you pay your fee. She enters it all into the state system, pushes it through. If you need to be printed as a new applicant, you'll get printed that night. Those things will all be in the mail the next morning. Everything is pushed through electronically that night, and the next morning, they're out in the mail. It's probably, you figure, your 3-day period from there, giving them 7 days for the rest. So anyways, our initial point of this is 1 day. From that point, we now wait to hear back from the state. Coming back from the state for both renewals and new applicants is running roughly 53 to 77 days. And why the difference is because prior to within the last month, they seem to be catching up. It's gone from 77 solid to now about 53 days on average, coming back to us. Clearly beyond the 40 days that the whole process can take to begin with. From that point, once we hear back from the state on the background checks based on the fingerprint cards and et cetera, it's taking the state 21 days on average. Sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's 35, but on average it's about 21 days to get your physical license in our hand so that we can call you and get it out to you. You do the math, averaging 76 days from when we grab your application and sit down with you till we're handing you back your license to carry.
I can add one other note to that, it's just from personal knowledge. Once you turn 70, you no longer have to pay the $100 fee. How about that? Go figure. Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
The original question was, what was the original question?
The original question was, how does one become trained, certified / licensed to purchase firearms, and what's the complete procedure, cost of licensing, etc.?
So I heard the chief say one thing, and I think I heard you say something else. And are those two different processes or procedures?
Yes.
Could somebody comment on the difference
Well,
between them?
you first have to go through your safety course, which is running about $100, and then you have to pay your application fee, which is $100. So roughly $200 just to get to the point where you're applied for a license. And then, from what Tim was saying, it takes somewhere around 70 days or so.
On average, about 76 before we process it and you get the card back.
I think the question that may be related to the slight confusion over this is, Chief, you mentioned a purchasing permit. Frankly, I've
Yes.
never heard of that. And I guess one of the questions would be, why would I pay $100 for a purchasing permit when I could get a license to carry for $100?
Great question. That's what, nobody does it, and.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
But it's in the books for a purchasing permit. And usually, like I said, it's coupled with a firearms identification card. So if you did it that way, it would be a $200
Yeah.
process. And that purchase, the permit is only good for 10 days. And I can honestly say I've never seen it happen. I'll come across the desk, but we're aware of it.
Okay, here's a great one. I'm a mom and I don't own guns. How do I keep my child safe if they come across a gun in someone else's house or location?
I guess I'll take that one.
There you go, Mom.
I have a 15-year-old. Before I ever got licensed, I taught my son the safety rules. What to do if you came across a gun, what not to do if you came across a gun. So, the basic safety rules for children: stop, don't touch, tell an adult. It's pretty simple. If you don't teach your children that, you've kind of failed them, because you can't control what happens in somebody else's house. I'm a responsible gun owner. My guns are locked up when they're not physically on me or going to the range. They're still locked up when they're going to the range. But if my son was to come across a gun in somebody else's house, I have every confidence in the world, even before we were gun owners, that he would be safe, because we drilled it into him. We taught him about stranger danger, we taught him about drugs, we taught him about alcohol, we talked to him about sex. He's 15, so those conversations are sometimes short. So we educate our son what to do. Stop, don't touch, get an adult. And every parent, whether you own guns or not, I would encourage you to teach your child that.
I'd like to comment on that same question. There's a program called the Eddie Eagle program that's put out by the NRA. And the whole purpose of that program is to teach young children what happens, what do you do if you find a gun. And I've worked with Cub Scouts and other kids groups, and I think it's interesting that you can ask a kid, what do you do if your clothes catch on fire? And I bet everybody in this room can answer that question. Stop, drop, and roll. Why do we all know that? Because we were all taught that at a very young age in school as part of the October fire prevention week and fire education week. But if you ask kids, well, what do you do if you find a gun? How many of them know? Stop, don't touch it, leave the area, tell an adult. And that is the entire message of the Eddie Eagle program. My co-instructor, Jim Gozzo, and I, some years ago, this must be going back 8 or 9 years now, we wanted to get this program into the Westford Public Schools. And so we contacted Chief Bobby Welsh. We got hooked up with the local DARE officer at the time. We went through the superintendent's office. We got approved by the school committee. We had to go through a whole process in order to get into the schools to teach this basic gun safety. It took us 3 years to get approval to do that. And we came into the schools one year and we did that for all the first graders, and we came back the next year and we did it for all the first graders. And when we came back to do it a third year, the superintendent had changed, the DARE officer had changed, we started the process again, and it was obviously going to drag out again. And we just got very frustrated with that. And I would encourage you to ask people on the school committee, whatever, what kind of gun safety education are we providing for kids today in Westford?
Pretty much answered some of the things I was going to ask. When I was my own Frank, and well, in like George, 42 years, same house, so currently I'm the same way. But I also taught school for 29 years. And if you get me a copy of that, I will go school committee for you. Because I have been asking also, just internally, if anybody had heard of it, may have not. But I know the ropes.
Well, the program, the program gets a bad rap,
I have to see the program first.
People, that's the entire message is what I just said. Stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. It doesn't promote gun use at all. The character, the Eddie Eagle character, and you should have seen Jim Gozzo in the 6-foot Eddie Eagle suit. He never appears where there are guns. It doesn't promote firearms. It promotes safety.
But I would like to see that,
Sure.
and then I'll get back to you.
Sure.
I hope you do follow up on that. I recall, I was on the,
I wrote in health education in Westford, so.
I was just going to say, I was on the school committee
When I go to the
for a number of years when Marilyn was spearheading the comprehensive health education program in Westford. And there was sort of an aura around that of if you teach kids about sex, they'll be doing it. And we have the same thing around guns. Don't talk about guns in the school, my gosh, you know, people will be out there shooting each other. So that would be a great link to get reestablished. End of editorial.
Can we have, we had another person join us, Matthew Trask, he's an.
Oh, I'm sorry,
attorney.
yes.
Could he introduce himself?
Hi, folks. I apologize for getting here a bit late, and just to the chief directly, I found myself a bit lost, and a couple of your officers were extremely helpful in having me back. So I want to commend your department on that. My name is Matt Trask. I'm a firearms, I'm an attorney in Framingham, and a large part of my practice handles firearms law. And although I do some criminal defense, probably 80% of my clients are honest firearms owners that are trying to navigate the legal process. They want to understand what can they do, what can't they do, how to interact with the police and resolve some of the questions and issues that they have. So the brief editorialization that I'll say is I deal in shades of gray. The officers at the other end of the table tend to deal in absolutes. This is what our training says, this is what the law says. Oftentimes that's not the issues that I'm asked to address. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has with the caveat that whenever you're dealing with the law and the courts, there's two sides to the story. And oftentimes these questions cannot be addressed with a simple yes or no. So I'm happy to be here and be happy to answer any questions that you folks have.
Thanks, Matt. Here's a good one. Can I buy a gun in New Hampshire?
May I take a stab at that one? So, it depends on what kind of gun it is. I'll give you the most complex answer first. So if you wanted to buy a handgun in New Hampshire, you can go to New Hampshire to a gun store. They will ask you, they say, I want to buy that handgun right there. And they will say, that's fantastic. Can we see your driver's license so we know where you live? My driver's license would say Massachusetts. They say, oh, okay, great. So you can buy the gun now, but you can't take it. It has to be transferred from them to a federal firearms licensed person here in Massachusetts. They will receive that gun. They will then call the FBI in the state to make sure that my background check is valid. And then they will sit there with me and we will fill out all the forms to register the gun here in Massachusetts. And you'll pay them an awful lot of money as well for that benefit. And
I got a question for you.
sure.
So does the federal firearms license dealer that it gets sent to, do they charge a fee?
Yes.
So there goes your sales.
Yeah, it's no, I-
$80 to $100. Both
Yeah.
my sisters just did.
yeah, there's no reason, you don't go to New Hampshire to buy a gun to save sales tax or anything silly like that. You go there because maybe they have a better selection.
Well, in terms of the selection issue, the FFL, the FFL in Massachusetts, also has to possess a state dealer's license. And part of the caveat of that state dealer license is they have to comply with the Attorney General's regulations, which say that a dealer can only transfer to a recipient firearms that are on the approved Attorney General roster. So you cannot, just to make clear, you cannot use the New Hampshire purchase and transfer to a Massachusetts FFL as a way to circumvent the Attorney General's requirements. So if the firearm that you want to purchase is not on the Attorney General's roster, that FFL in Massachusetts can't transfer it back to you. And the only option is for them to send it back to New Hampshire and hope that you can get the dealer up there to give you your money back.
By the way, you can also do the same thing over the internet. And it sounds a little spooky, but the internet sites that are set up specifically to handle firearms, I think are very good about knowing the Attorney General's requirements in Massachusetts and cutting off the sale and say, I'm sorry, I can't sell you that gun.
Yeah, over the internet, just to be clear, they would have to ship it also to a local
Right.
dealer. The other thing is if you go to New Hampshire and I want to buy a rifle, a long gun, either a rifle or a shotgun, if I go to a New Hampshire dealer, I can buy it directly from them. They're still going to do the instant criminal background check. They're going to see my license, know that I'm licensed. And as long as it's a Massachusetts compliant rifle, I can take possession of that gun, but handguns have to physically get shipped. And that's federal law that controls
Right.
that from state to state.
Do you have a New Hampshire license as well? Doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. I'm a
Okay.
resident of Massachusetts. I have a New Hampshire non-resident
Yeah,
license.
both, let's say, it doesn't matter, okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Just to add on to what Matthew said, I recently visited a gun store in Hudson, New Hampshire, with my sisters who live out of state in two different states, and they were able to purchase guns there and have them shipped to a federally licensed.
Right, yeah, so you pay for shipping and then you pay for the transfer.
Of the 12 cases of handguns that he had, there was one case for Massachusetts residents.
Yeah, personally, I find shopping for handguns or even rifles in New Hampshire to be frustrating because most of what's on the shelves, we're not allowed to own in this state.
Don't forget the FA-10 requirements for rifles.
Right, okay, yeah, I forgot to mention that. Once I bring that long gun back into Massachusetts, I still have a requirement to register that with the state. I have 7 days to file that form on the FA-10 form.
Okay.
So there's no hiding.
What's the gun show loophole I hear about, and does this exist in Massachusetts?
I can start with that because I did recently purchase a gun at a gun show. So factually, let me tell you what it takes to go to a gun show and look at and purchase a gun, since I've been through that. So you walk into a gun show, and first of all, about 50% of the tables there are people that aren't even selling guns. They're selling accessories and a variety of other things. If you want to even pick up and hold and look at a gun, you have to show them your LTC. Otherwise, you physically cannot touch it. Once you decide you want to buy it, you tell the person you want to buy it. Most of the folks there are federally licensed dealers. They take you, the firearm, to a table in the back. That's where they do all the instant background checks. You go through all of that, and when all that comes back, then you fill out all the paperwork, the FA-10s and whatnot. Firearm is transferred, and then yes, you may leave with it at that point. I'm not particularly sure what the so-called loophole is. The only thing that I'm aware of is that there are some people, a private citizen licensed to carry and to have a gun, can purchase a table at a gun show and can sell that as a private person. They physically will not take you down to do the instant background check, but because they are required by law only to sell to someone that has an LTC, by virtue of you having an LTC, you have already had a background check. So that would be considered to be a private transfer.
Is this true of gun shows all through the United States? Because this doesn't sound like what I've been hearing. Okay, I mean, you're saying something that's very regulated, and that sounds fine. I hear about people walking in off the streets, and it's in Arizona or where, they're able to go to gun shows and don't have to produce what you're asking. That's what I'm saying. Is this consistent? Or is
I'm
this-
sure that there are different laws in different states, but I can
Okay,
only
so-
speak to
so you're not
Massachusetts.
talking- Okay, then I'm sorry. I was talking out of state. I was thinking out of state. Okay.
What are the laws regarding protecting oneself with a firearm while in your own home? Get this right, you might want to take notes.
Ring the doorbell.
We have 3 hours.
Yeah.
The laws regarding the use of deadly force is ultimately what it comes down to. There are so many different permutations that I couldn't explain every scenario. The best advice that I can give you is if you are in a position where you are considering the use of lethal force, deadly force, First of all, understand that in Massachusetts, the use of deadly force is an affirmative defense to homicide. Homicide being the killing of another human being, nothing more, nothing less. It is an affirmative defense, which means that you can still be charged, and you probably still will be charged. And it is ultimately up to the finder of fact, the jury, to determine that you acted in a manner consistent with the use of force doctrine, which, summed up briefly, says that you believed that your life or the life of another was in imminent peril, at which point you can use lethal force. However, if at the exact second that lethal force is implemented, it's not necessary, you aren't met with a lethal threat, then a jury could determine that it is not proper at that point. So it depends, like anything else. If you come down the stairs and you find someone in your home with your flat screen TV in their hands walking towards the door, is that a lethal force scenario? Probably not. If they drop the TV, pull out a gun, and point it at you, is that a lethal force scenario? Perhaps it is. A couple of ancillary points that have been used against folks in the past: warning shots. Don't do it. By firing a warning shot, not only is it tactically disadvantageous, but you are demonstrating, perhaps, that you are not in fear for your life. You have a second to warn the guy and hope that he runs away. It suggests that you weren't actually in fear for your life. You weren't prepared to take a life to defend your own. There is no requirement that says that you have to flee your home or flee into the back room and hide and lock the door. If you are in your house and you are met with a situation where you believe your life is in danger, you may use lethal force to protect yourself or someone else, your spouse, your children, etc. But it is an extremely dynamic scenario. At what point does that threat to your life no longer exist? And it's a judgment call, and it's a issue that has so many different variables, so many what ifs. There's no 1 minute canned answer to the question. Ultimately, it comes down to, at the moment you pull the trigger, do you believe that your life is in danger? And if you do, be prepared to defend that, and it's your burden to prove to the jury that you acted consistently with your fear for your own life.
I'll just add to that, in the safety class that I just took, was taught by a Massachusetts State Police officer. And on that very question, he basically told us that as a armed person, licensed, trained, armed person, we have to take every means possible to not fire the weapon, even if there's a dangerous situation. And he said that's part, and that was part of the training, is to not how to learn just how to handle the weapon, but how to learn when to not use it, which is, do everything you can to not use it. In Massachusetts, in other states, obviously, it's different.
Matt, could you just go into how that differs from the castle doctrine? Like for New Hampshire, for instance, where in New Hampshire there was a famous case, and it just recently came down. It was the Bird case, where an individual was confronted with somebody breaking into his house. This guy, Ward Bird, shoots at the individual, and he gets charged. Then it goes to court. The governor, it gets very, very involved with a lot of politics, and how that differs from the castle doctrine to Massachusetts. I mean, it's like night and day, right across the line.
The easiest way to explain the castle doctrine is how do you perceive the threat? How is the threat perceived? An example would be, if you come downstairs in the middle of the night into your living room, and you see a shadowy figure who you know is not supposed to be there. You don't know why they're there. You don't know what they're doing there, but they're there and you perceive it as a threat. That in and of itself, as a matter of law, written into the law, is sufficient to justify the use of lethal force in that scenario. Now that is a very broad summary of 30 states' doctrines in terms of the castle doctrine. Every state is different because it's written into every state's law differently. I'm not licensed in New Hampshire, so I can't formally speak to those requirements. The Massachusetts doctrine is it's subjective. It's a subjective threat. What did you feel at that point in time? And more importantly, was that fear reasonable? So you could come downstairs, my example that I used before, there's a shadowy figure in your house holding your TV. Well, you know he's not up to any good, and you don't like the guy, and you're probably a little ticked off that somebody's in your house taking your stuff. But is it reasonable under those circumstances to discharge a weapon, to use lethal force under those circumstances? And the state's attorney is expected to argue that it is not reasonable for someone to be in fear of their life under those scenarios, under those circumstances. A castle doctrine state, a stand your ground state, which is in the news, has been in the news lately, basically suggests that any threat to your person can be met with lethal force, as opposed to the Massachusetts component of that, which says that lethal force can only be used to dispel lethal force. So if somebody comes at you with a fist, they're running at you across the room with a clenched fist. In a castle doctrine state, in a stand your ground state, that may be sufficient to use lethal force. If somebody's punching you in the head, we sort of get into a gray area. If somebody's hitting you in the head with their fists, yeah, you can do damage that way. I'm sure there's some folks in here that have studied martial arts or spent some time in the military. That is a lethal situation, perhaps. In a stand your ground or a castle doctrine state, you could be entitled to use lethal force in that scenario. In Massachusetts, the standard is it reasonable to believe that you are going to die, essentially? Does that answer the question, Chief?
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to show the difference from state to state in Massachusetts is, we see it a lot in the news about you stand your ground in Florida with the case that's being debated in Florida, and it's completely different from Massachusetts, a reasonableness doctrine.
Dennis?
Yeah, Mr. Trask, I'd like to just to pursue that just a little bit more, and I think the chief might be, correct me if I'm wrong, but with regards to use of force by law enforcement officials, there's a kind of a double standard. One is belief that you're in fear of your own life or serious bodily injury. Now, are you saying that that does not exist with regards to civilians defending themselves? It has to be lethal force, or if they believe that they're going to be seriously injured, does that justify it as well?
And here we go with the gray area. What does the law say? The part of the problem is, unlike a lot of other states which have these so-called castle doctrines, the right to the affirmative defense of use of lethal force, self-defense, is what's called a common law defense. It's not written down anywhere. And so it evolves by what have juries and what have judges done in other cases. So could I find a serious bodily injury case? I could. Could I make that argument to the jury that use of lethal force in that situation was appropriate? Yes, I could. If somebody takes a swing at your head with a baseball bat, I think it's negligible whether we're talking about use of lethal force or fear of serious bodily injury. You know, same if somebody comes at you with a knife. It's not a guaranteed fatality, as it were, but it could result in death. So I think the standard is a negligible one. The problem here is it is a question of fact, and which means that the ultimate resolution of the case is going to be done by 12 people who weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. So, and I say that with, you know, with all respect to the system, but in Massachusetts there is no book that I can open and point to. There's no PowerPoint that I can put up on the wall and say, here's where it says the requirements. It's a common law standard that has evolved over the course of 200 some odd years. And it is applied, often inconsistently. I can show you cases where it was allowed in one circumstance and disallowed in very similar circumstances, because it's up to that finder of fact and the arbiter of law, the judge and the jury, as opposed to a black and white standard that you can reference and rely on.
Just to follow up to this question, so the castle law does not exist in Massachusetts, is what I'm understanding.
Yes.
And that there's a standard that you've just explained to us. Could someone tell me, has this standard changed over the last 30 or so years in Massachusetts? So if some people obtained their permits maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, might they be under a different impression of what the laws were then?
Yes and no, because it is a common law affirmative defense, the standard continuously evolves. But practically speaking, what it means is every case is different, but they should all be about the same. There have been legislative efforts to put on the books a castle doctrine, quote unquote, in Massachusetts that is a bit more specific with respect to the self-defense and use of lethal force requirements, and unfortunately that has not gone anywhere. The law has not changed significantly in terms of what is the standard. The standard is the standard that I explained earlier. The evolution, the change, is in those specific cases. Is it appropriate if someone points a knife at you to use lethal force? Well, it may have been in this case, and in a later case it was not, for example. That doesn't necessarily, unfortunately, mean that you can take that to mean that if somebody has a knife, don't shoot, because there's 1,000 other factors in that case. Where were they? How far away were they? What was their level of training? What was their perception of the threat? And all of those things, the totality of those circumstances, is what drives the decision, not the one factor of, well, the guy was holding X weapon.
I got my training in New York, so it doesn't apply here, but it's like the stop, drop, and roll in fire. Well, we were taught, and it was drummed into us, if you can run and you can hide, do it. Don't put yourself in a situation where you have to make a split-second decision whether to pull a trigger or not, because you're very likely to be wrong. The scenario of somebody seeing a shadowy figure in the living room, well, that could be your spouse who got up to let the cat in, or who knows. And if you're half asleep, you roll out of bed, you hear a noise downstairs, what we were taught was just don't do it. Let's change the subject a little bit. How can firearms, specifically shotguns and rifles, be legally transported in a vehicle like my minivan with no trunk that can be locked? With no trunk that can be locked.
Basically, I think you just have to have them in a case. You know, if you don't have a locked trunk, you can secure the firearm itself with some kind of a lock, a cable lock, and have it inside a case, even a soft case. And as far as I know, that would meet the requirements of the law.
That will meet the requirements, but added is, it has to be unloaded.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I thought that was sort of the duh part.
No, Can I ask a question?
I agree.
Yes.
Is the question asking traveling within the state or between two different states?
As a non-resident hunter in New York State, that's a real bear. So what's the answer?
Why did I think so?
Why did you think that was going to be easy?
There
There's no good answer.
Yeah, because, notice a pattern, there's a lot of good answers down at this down to this side, it's, well, it depends. There is a federal law which recognizes that you have an ability to transport firearms through a state which you do not have a license to possess those firearms in, provided that you are lawfully able to possess them at your destination and you're doing so for a legal purpose. Sounds great. What are the requirements? Don't stop to pee, don't stop to eat. Just keep going.
Don't leave the vehicle.
Don't leave the vehicle. And they have to be unloaded, locked, and inaccessible. Now, I will share with you a story of a gentleman who, if I recall the facts of the case correctly, was traveling through New Jersey, in this case. And he was licensed at his point of origin, and he could lawfully possess his firearms at his destination. He stopped in New Jersey. He didn't get out of the car, he pulled over, he locked all the doors, and took a nap. Police officer came up, sees a guy passed out, knocks on the window, sees gun cases in the back, orders the guy out of the car, searches the vehicle, discovers unloaded, locked up firearms, except that in New Jersey, there's an absolute requirement, like Massachusetts, to have a license. He was charged, and last I heard, will be spending the next 7.5 years in jail. The judge in the case refused to give an instruction to the jury that there exists a federal safe harbor law that would have protected him if he were traveling from state to state. So what result? Well, I don't know, because he lost his last appeal. So where does that leave the federal safe harbor law, the federal transportation law? I don't know. The law is still on the books. It still exists. It is, like the self-defense issues, an affirmative defense. It's your obligation to raise it, and it's a factor that the jury may, but not necessarily, consider. So, best advice, fly, check your firearms, and retrieve them at the point of origin.
Except,
And hope you
If
don't
you-
get delayed in
Right.
a state like New
if
York.
you fly and your luggage gets lost, or you miss a connection, you're in violation of the law. You can't carry it in the cabin with you, it has to be checked. But, what's your record with lost luggage? It's just, there's no good way.
So, to that fact, about flying from one state to Massachusetts. Let's use the example that my father-in-law has a couple guns that he's looking to get rid of, and he's getting older, and he wants to offer them to me. And we've talked about me flying out to Kansas to pick them up, and then flying back here with them. Short of getting, obviously it would be a no-stop flight, and it could get weather-related delays and things like that. But the question is, legally, I can fly from Kansas to Massachusetts with a couple handguns, as long as I go through all the right way of letting the TSA know about it and the ticket person and all that. Is that true?
No.
No.
Simplest way is to go to a licensed dealer, have the dealer ship them to a Massachusetts dealer. I mean,
First
it
of
costs
all,
you $50 a gun, but it's fail-safe.
First of all, you can't take possession of a handgun in another state, that's federal law. So, what needs to happen is you need to take possession of those from a federally licensed firearms dealer here in this state. So, the only way I know to do that is have them ship them.
Yeah.
If he's shipping those, probably be cost effective to have them ship the long guns with them and just do it that way, because unless you fly out there and go to a dealer out there
hope
and
they're
have
on the
them
list.
transferred and hope they're on the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, I wouldn't tell you to fly out there and take possession of those guns at all.
How about if a couple of them were mine when I lived there 25 years ago and I left them with them?
Yeah, I don't know if we want the attorney to answer that one, because that's gonna be a lot of, well, ifs and all of this, but there's, I think you only have a window of, is it 6 months to, when you move into state?
180 days.
It's 180 days, yeah, 180 days. When you move into the state and you bring guns with you, you have 180 days to get your license, and you're supposed to, actually, no, you don't have to transfer them, you don't have to register them. But once that 180-day window is up,
The safest way that I would do it, and we get those calls and those questions, is exactly what they had said, is just to go through a federal license dealer, to one dealer to another dealer. And I wasn't aware of the cost associated with that, and people sometimes don't do it because of the cost that is associated with it. Is there a set cost for the dealer, or do they just?
They charge us a lot.
shop the dealers.
Yeah, I would shop the dealers and see who gives you a better price on it. If they're gonna send a whole bunch all at once,
Right.
should-
I did it once with a shotgun, and it was $40 from federal to federal
Yeah.
here. So it was a free gun, so it was $40 to get it here, so it all makes sense.
The other thing that you need to watch for, having, a friend of mine went through this, is if you inherit a handgun, depends on the state. In New York State, you have 7 days from the death of the individual to get it out of the state, or else it's forfeit. Now, you're going through the wake, the funeral, the settling of the estate, the whole thing, but don't forget in 7 days, you've got to transfer that firearm through a dealer.
The issue being inheritance, and I think that's a good way to close it. There are exceptions for acquiring a firearm by inheritance, either in a will or the intestacy laws of the state. Each one is on a case-by-case basis. I'll close the question by saying, whatever the dealer charges you, and the chief's point, whatever the dealer charges you to transfer it, I guarantee it's gonna be less than what I cost.
It's cheap. So here's one, maybe the chief wants to take this one on. Where do criminals get guns?
This is, the guns that we see, we've had guns that have been stolen out of residence. And prior to this discussion, we had a discussion about releasing information, like New York did, about the state of New York released, or a county in New York released all the people who had registered guns, registered to them.
It was a newspaper.
It was a newspaper that released this information. And basically what that did was, it told anybody that was looking for guns who had what guns. In Massachusetts, that is prohibited. It's covered under the public information under Chapter 66, and I believe it's Chapter 4, Section 7, also states that you cannot release firearms information of the licensed people. So in Massachusetts, they have that covered in the law. But, that in and of itself was, with house breaks, we see people, houses getting broken into, the weapons being taken, and they can still have the gun locks on it, and they'll still take it. We've had, I know of other communities that have had gun shops broken into and targeted. So that's a lot of the places where they get it. Some people just don't keep track of their guns, and somebody might have 10 guns and they're missing one. And they don't know where it is, and it will come back. We will get a call from the ATF. We've traced guns from 20, 30 years ago that were taken in a house break in Westford, and it ended up in New York. So where do they get them?
Aren't straw purchases the biggest single source? I mean, I know you can walk into the Pennsylvania gun shop, and if you've got a driver's license, you can buy the gun and walk away with it.
Well, you know, yeah, and that I don't know about, but I was recently down in Connecticut when this debate, and after Sandy Hook, the incident happened, and I was shocked to see how easy it was to get a weapon. You just walked into a Walmart with a license, and you waited 2 days. There was no background checks. Not like Massachusetts.
No.
And you were 18 years of age, and you could get it. And their definition of an assault weapon is different than Massachusetts definitions. They would have a definition that if it had met the requirement for an assault weapon, if it had it was semi-automatic, it had 2 components, whether it be a telescopic shoulder or a folding stock, a suppressor, so there was hand grip, so there was different components that were associated with the Connecticut law. But it was very easy for somebody, but that's not the case in Massachusetts. And that's a lot of that debate came up about, well, what about Connecticut and Massachusetts? It was literally night and day.
I saw a documentary on television about Camden, New Jersey, and basically what they were saying was that if you can't get a handgun on the street in 10 minutes, you're not trying. So that's another place, just cities where there's just a lot of illegal activity.
Yeah, years ago, I'll just take a minute, we were considering moving to Vermont. So we were traveling through the state, and I stopped at this gun store, and I asked the owner, I said, what do you have to do to be able to buy a handgun in Vermont? And he said, are you some kind of wise guy? And I looked around behind me, and there were TV cameras on the street filming this gun store because somebody had shot somebody the previous week with a gun that had been bought there, and he thought I was coming in as a setup. Talk about going away with your tail between your legs. But the answer is nothing. You don't even have to have a Vermont driver's license to buy a gun in Vermont. You walk in, cash on the barrel, it's yours legally. Not back in Massachusetts. I can't bring it back to Massachusetts if I did that, but.
Time Magazine put out an article that was pretty informative, and they looked at all the states and their requirements for the states, and they did a pretty in-depth article on it, and they showed how strict Massachusetts really is with their laws, and the several steps that other states that, quite frankly, were not even in the picture compared to Massachusetts. So Vermont was one of them.
Yeah. Okay, so we alluded to this once. Let's face the question direct on. What is an assault weapon in Massachusetts?
You want to take that, Matt, or you want me to read the legal definition?
Do you have the,
Well, actually, let me just preface it and then read the legal definition. Depending on your views on the issue, from my perspective, a legal advantage to the Massachusetts assault weapon ban is that it directly mirrors the federal ban from 1994. It is a near verbatim copy, and it specifically references the code, the United States Code section where that ban applies, which makes it extremely easy to advise someone on what is considered an assault weapon. What is considered a high-capacity magazine? What is considered a permanent modification, for example? And because the Massachusetts law references the United States Code, residents can, I think, reasonably rely on a number of the ATF opinions that came out in that 10-year period interpreting the law, because the Massachusetts law is verbatim. Now, they're not binding in Massachusetts, but they certainly go a long way to explaining that. And with that, I'll send it over to the chief to
Well, I think.
give us the text.
You're right on with what we have to deal with. The assault weapon shall have the same meaning as a semi-automatic assault weapon as defined in the Federal Public Safety and Recreational Firearms Use Protection Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 921, appearing in subsection on September 13th, 1994. And it gives a list of the weapons, like an AK, an Uzi, Colt AR-15, and then it's a long laundry list of it. But I think Matt kind of hit it right on. It's basically the same definition as the Fed's 1994, September of 94 definition.
I'd like to say one little thing about this. I'd like to say what an assault weapon is not, because I think there's a significant amount of confusion in people that I've spoken to with regard to this. An assault weapon is not an assault rifle. It is not a machine gun. Machine guns were banned in the 1930s. A machine gun being, if you pull the trigger, it just keeps shooting until it's empty. An assault weapon, I personally hate that term because it's misleading, is something that looks like an assault rifle, but behaves like every other rifle that's been made pretty much since the 1800s. One trigger pull, one bullet. It's a definition based on the aesthetic quality of the firearm. And that's all it is. It's a firearm that looks like something that the military would use, but quite frankly, because it's a semi-automatic, there's no military in the world that would ever use it. So that's just the piece that I want to add to that.
Yeah, what Al was saying as far as the aesthetics, today's definition in Massachusetts of an assault weapon is any semi-automatic rifle that has more than 2 features, and these features being a pistol grip, an adjustable stock, a flash suppressor,
Bayonet.
and a bayonet lock.
And a grenade launcher.
And so any 2 of those, and those are all cosmetic things, because last time I checked, I'm not allowed to own a grenade, so a grenade launcher wouldn't really do me any good. So those are fairly cosmetic things. They don't actually affect the function of that rifle, of that, so.
That's down the road.
Okay, I think this is a very important question, it just came in. How do you effectively store a firearm for home defense with young children at home?
I'll take it. What I have at home is a heavy-duty lockbox that is padded inside, that I keep a loaded handgun in, and it has a simplex lock in the top, which is a push-button lock, that even in the dark you can feel the buttons and you can press them and the top will pop open in 2 seconds. You can have a loaded gun in your hand. But no unauthorized person can get into that without a good half hour with a sledgehammer and a pry bar. So that's what I advise people to do.
That was the solution I chose after my brother-in-law and I went through an exercise of saying, well, our guns are stored in the safe, our ammunition is stored someplace else, and the safe's got a 4-digit combination. How long would it take you to get your gun if you needed to defend your home? In his case, it was 32 minutes. By the time he was able to have the gun ready to use, in my case, it was probably 20 minutes, and I went out and bought the solution that Rick's talking about. Which, just as a by the way, is stored about 15 feet from my bed. Because what you don't want to do is have somebody pop up in bed, hears a noise, grab a gun, and take a shot before they're even awake. And that's happened a number of times too. So at least I have to put my feet on the cold floor and travel a ways to get to my gun safe.
Yeah. I just want to add that these boxes now are actually getting quite sophisticated. You can mount them to the floor from the inside of the box, so that the person physically couldn't even remove the box if they tried. And even if they did, even if they jackhammered the box off the floor, they're mounted with an alarm such that if it detects motion, it lets off this ear-piercing alarm, so that you couldn't walk away with the box without everybody within the neighborhood knowing. So it's, they do think about these things pretty good for that type of scenario.
Oh, here's another good one. Does the Westford Police Department have a preference on notifying about concealed carry during traffic stops?
Well, it'd be nice to know. As an officer walking up to a car and seeing a gun on somebody's waistband, or I think it's a common courtesy. We would like to know that, and it doesn't mean, it just means that somebody has a license, a weapon on them, and the next question from the officer would be, do you have a license to possess that? And and if they produce that, and under the law, you're supposed to have that license on your person, and it's good. But seeing a weapon in a car kind of brings the officer up another level, and it's a safety issue for the officer. So it is nice to know. In a lot of states, it's mandatory for the office, for somebody that gets stopped, to advise the officer. I know the state police deal with that a lot, people coming in and throughout, and I can say, for the most part, when that situation happens, in dealing with the officers and hearing what the officers, people 99% of the time will say, I have a firearm in the vehicle. And it just lets the officer know that. And instead of seeing it and stumbling across it and kind of ratcheting it up a little bit, it's good for us to know that.
Good idea to keep your hands on the steering wheel when you tell them.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. A corollary to that is that one of the things you ought to teach your kids before they get a driving permit is if you get pulled over by the police at night, you turn on the interior light, you put your hands on the steering wheel, and you sit still, put the window down, and shut up until you've had the conversation initiated by the police officer.
George, I wish you said that 20 years ago.
I just wanted to add on to that. There is no requirement in Massachusetts to inform a police officer who pulls you over that you are carrying a concealed firearm. If you're doing it properly, they shouldn't see it. But if you feel more comfortable informing the police officer who has just pulled you over for hopefully not really much of anything, that they won't get upset. Because while Westford PD might be very open and comfortable with hearing that, that doesn't hold true throughout the state, and certainly throughout the country. I know that doesn't hold true.
Certainly not in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, in New Jersey, you're not allowed to have a.
Back here, could I follow up with the chief? Is there some standard training procedure that you would have with officers in the event that somebody did identify? Meaning, would you immediately be asked to step from the car? Would you?
No, it's, it is a standard part of the training. They go through it in the academy. It's applied patrol procedures for officers, troopers. They deal with it as part of the curriculum in the academies because there is that chance that you're going to come across somebody with a license, a weapon in their vehicle. So it is part of their training, but like Deb said, there is no requirement in Massachusetts, but my preference is let the officer know so they know, and if you're licensed, it's not an issue. So that's how I perceive it though. But it's an officer safety standard as well, and that's how we prefer it.
I
Let's go
actually
back
have
here,
a
we haven't had a
question
question
for you.
back here. Oh, I'm sorry, Deb.
I'm sorry, not to try and take control, because we actually get this question quite a bit. When you pull somebody over, do you see whether or not, when you run their license or their driver's registration, whether or not they have a license to carry? Do you see that information on the
It depends on how we run them and at what point we're running them. It depends on how deep we run them. Initially, no.
Back in the corner.
Yeah, is there a list of venues or a way to find out where you're not allowed to carry a weapon? I know-
Assuming you're licensed to carry concealed,
Right.
where can't you and where can you? If you hadn't asked that, I was going to later.
Well, under the law, even if you're licensed, the only, you can't carry on a school or campus, or school grounds or a campus. Even if you're a licensed, the only exception is a police officer. So that's written right in the law. Other
Like, let's
venues,
say Fenway Park. Do you have to call a venue and ask permission?
I believe that's a private issue, it's with them, and they wouldn't let you in
Right.
either way, so I think that's a private issue. So, but I know, under the law, it would be just the schools are listed as.
What about courthouses?
There is a metal detector in the courthouse. Matt, have you run across that with courthouses and?
I have. Just a couple of things to add to the chief. There is written in the law, and it doesn't apply to a lot of folks, so everybody forgets about it. But there is a law that says you can't carry a firearm within 500 feet or 500 yards of the water area at Logan Airport. There is a law in there.
That's a new one on me.
Now, understand as well, that's what the state law says. There are federal prohibitions on carrying a firearm in certain federal facilities, military bases, federal courthouses, federal buildings, all have a federal ban, which makes it a crime as well. Courthouses, although there's nothing written in the Mass General Law, there is a standing judicial order that prohibits the carrying of firearms in the courthouses, probably. It's a standing order with respect to possession of a firearm. Now, there are metal detectors. There are certain people that do not have to go through the metal detector. When I go to court, I don't have to go through the metal detector. Does that mean that I am allowed to carry a firearm in court even though I don't have to go through the metal detector? Not if the standing order applies to that courthouse. I'm still in violation of an order of the court, even though I don't have to go through the metal detector. Regarding the Fenway Park question, it's a private issue, but carrying a firearm is in an area where somebody is designated, you're not allowed to carry a firearm here, is considered a violation of that legal license to be on that property, which means you're trespassing. And so even if you have tickets to Fenway Park, that license to be on that property is conditioned upon the permission granted by the venue owner, and if the terms of that use say no guns, and you're carrying, then you are in violation of that, and it's a common law trespass.
Let's hear something.
Do federal buildings include post offices in this case?
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Yeah, my understanding
Yes, I would say yes.
is yes, except how, what about post offices, what about Amtrak stations? These are quasi-federal facilities that are privately regulated. So the best answer I can give you at this point is, I'm gonna have to look it up and get back to you.
And Matt, just to build on the court issue, there are some courts that don't even allow police officers to carry weapons into their courts.
Back in the corner.
Just quick, do they have to post such a thing? I mean, how would you know? I have walked into a building where they have actually a sign, no firearms allowed. how do you know if somebody, can a private citizen post a sign and say, we don't allow firearms here?
With,
Like a
does
restaurant?
Massachusetts have binding
Like a
signage?
restaurant or furniture store,
Yeah.
any,
It's,
how do you figure out where you can go?
that's a premises liability question. It's not an area of law that I have 100% control over. Two conflicting points. If you don't know that you are not allowed to carry, if it has not been, indicated in a way, there's certainly a defense to that trespassing charge. You were not aware. That being said, common law trespass means you don't have to know you're trespassing. If you're wandering around your backyard and just happen to stray into your neighbor's property and didn't know because they didn't have signs up that said no trespassing, that is technically a trespass. So, can your neighbor who you're having a disagreement while you're over at his house watching the game some Sunday say, oh, you got a gun, you're trespassing, I'm calling the police? As a practical matter, I don't think that would go very far, but in terms of the mandatory signage to be binding, I can't speak to that, I apologize.
Yeah, in the carrying within, like, on a campus, that, you won't find that under 140 or the licenses to carry, it would be under 269 10J. It's under, dangerous weapons. And that's where they classify it as on a campus. And they further, in the law, it actually says BB gun too. And the administrators are supposed to notify the police department if they even come across a BB gun.
All of these questions that deal with the law, just so you understand, you get these answers because, Chief, can you hold up that book? Is that book not the guide that police officers around the state use?
A lot of them do, I do, because it has a lot of questions, answers, and a lot of the gray area. You notice all these tabs? This is my quick reference. You can tell it gets used.
So that's the book that attempts to explain some of the laws to the law enforcement personnel who are supposed to be enforcing those. So when these guys give you perhaps and maybe and it depends, it's not that they're obfuscating on purpose, it's because it's a very difficult question to answer.
One more back here.
Yeah, if I might ask a couple of follow-ups on that. So if you're stopped by an officer, I'm looking at the chief, to start with at least, and an officer inquires as to what you might have in the car or what you might be carrying on your person, whether it's about firearms or anything else that you might have in your car, are you required to answer that?
No.
And the other question, I'm sure you'd recommend that you do, but.
It'd be nice if you
yeah,
do, but you're not
exactly.
required to do it. But,
And then the other question I had was, clearly school properties are off limits, but how is that defined? Is that a piece of property that's legally owned, that's owned by a school?
It says,
Or is that
in the
school-
law, under 269-10, it just says campus, secondary schools, colleges, and whatnot. And so it's 10J, 269-10J.
Thank you.
I have a question here that says, and the questioner may have to clarify this a little bit. It says, explain PIN numbers for magazine sizes.
PIN numbers for magazine sizes.
Yeah.
Magazine, former police chief told me that, firearms licensees can obtain a PIN number, which allows them to get different magazine sizes, and I don't know, that's why I'm asking the question, I don't understand it.
Guns, the magazines are supposed to have pin numbers on them. They're supposed to be stamped. But that comes into the large capacity.
Magazines are supposed to have.
Well, yeah, they are. And a lot of times that you don't find them, because you can buy a large capacity, see that large capacity issue with the magazines? it would be more than 10 rounds for a firearm, more than 5 rounds for a rifle or shotgun. And the issue was, when we had a big debate not too long ago about what was going on for large capacity, and it was readily a gun that can accept a large capacity feeding device. Now, the law kind of, it excludes like 22 rifles that have a tubular feeding device, the way you can send in, I don't even know what a rifle with the 22 will take down the feeding device.
17 rounds.
Yeah, it will, so it exceeds the 10, but they excluded the 22. And then they basically said a drum fed or a magazine fed. And it was, I believe, the magazine had to be manufactured, and it's in the book, I have no idea where it is.
Okay.
But it's by 1994, it was done.
Before the federal ban went
The
into
federal
effect.
ban.
So some of the eyebrow raising here was because you used the word PIN, and to us, that's a personal identification number which you can have with your LTC to speed up the process of buying a gun versus a fingerprint reading. So that was kind of our confusion.
Okay, our camera operator tells me we need a 3-minute break to change tapes. Can you bear with us? Got some good ones coming up. Okay, thank you for your patience. We're gonna pick this up again. Why would an individual be denied a license to carry in Massachusetts?
The question was, why would an individual be denied in Massachusetts? And this kind of gets kicked around a lot. I know we had the discussion prior to the meeting tonight about, it depends from one community to another community, how chiefs, the licensing authority, and Matt, you could probably expand on this, how they go about issuing their licenses to carry. Now, there are statutory disqualifiers, something that would be, and one of them would be like a felony conviction, something like that. And then there are other disqualifiers, not disqualifiers, but it comes down to the chief making the decision. And as long as the chief isn't arbitrary and capricious in his decision, in this case on that, I believe it's the Moya case, it's a 1983 case where the chief denied an individual a license to carry, and he denied the individual the license to carry based on I believe it was a marijuana,
Sealed marijuana.
sealed marijuana, and it was actually dismissed.
Yes.
It was a dismissed case. So it wasn't even a conviction, but the chief felt that the individual shouldn't have been able to obtain a license to carry. That was contested, and the chief prevailed in his decision. And so I guess it comes down to the chief in individual communities on how they perceive and how some communities, some chiefs will not issue a license to carry Class A. They'll only issue Class Bs. Some even take it a step further, and they won't even issue licenses to carry. We don't. We have, I believe, what's our number now? We have over 1,949 licenses to carry within the town.
Valerie. Clarify for me, Chief, the difference between Class A and Class B.
Okay, real simple, license not carry Class A is concealed weapon, $100, same requirements, you have to go through the safety courses. Class B, same thing, but target shooting, is that pretty?
No.
Pretty, well, target shooting and hunting, and competition shooting?
No, a Class B license limits the type of handgun you can actually own. It also means that you can't carry concealed for personal protection. And then there's Class A, which allows you to buy, now there are some semi-automatics, I believe, can you buy a semi-automatic?
Just what I tell people is if you get a Class B license, you can only buy revolvers for handguns. Now, there may be some exceptions to that, but I would say that's a general rule.
A Class A license allows you to own, it also allows you to own and possess, not just conceal carry, but own and possess a firearm that can accept a detachable magazine greater than 10 rounds. Not that you're legally allowed to own that 10 round, that greater than 10 round magazine. So, for instance, the Smith & Wesson M&P 9mm comes with a standard capacity 12 round magazine in every state except for Massachusetts, because that gun was not made before some arbitrary date in 1994. As a Class A license holder, I can own that gun and possess that gun and carry it on me as long as it only has a 10 round magazine in it. If I was to have the 12 round magazine, I would be violating the law. A Class B licensee cannot even own that gun. They can't own it, possess it, carry it, anything, because it's capable of accepting a greater than 10 round magazine.
Did you say owning that magazine was illegal?
Owning a 12 round magazine is illegal.
Owning a magazine.
Manufactured after 1994.
And the difference in Class B is non-large capacity.
Non-large capacity, so any firearm that could carry a magazine greater than 10 rounds, you're not allowed to own it. So Class B, I cannot own that Smith & Wesson M&P 9mm. Class A, I can. It restricts quite a number of firearms.
And another issue is, what's the difference, why shouldn't I just apply for a Class A? And there is no difference in the application process at all. It's the same amount of money, it just limits your ability to carry a specific type of weapon, a large capacity weapon.
Yeah.
Okay. Where can I obtain a list of firearm safety courses available in the area? Watch the business cards come out.
Actually, I'm a firearms instructor, but I only assistant teach. I teach women on target classes primarily, and kind of starter courses. I volunteer my time, but you can go to nra.org. Is it nra.org? What's that?
State police website.
The state police website lists all the firearms instructors.
Firearm safety.
I think Mr. Rick over here teaches a few courses a year.
I do. I teach 5 classes a year at the Westford Sportsman's Club here, and the only place I advertise is through the Road and Bush catalog, and the courses are always full months in advance. So, but I know that you can go to the NRA on their website. They will list any instructors who have listed their courses with them. They're available there.
The Gun Owners Action League website, goal.org, they also teach a number of classes. They have excellent instructors, and they list their classes on their site.
I think they also have I think they may maintain a directory of instructors, goal.
Yes, I think they do. In addition, the Mass Firearms Academy is down in Hopkinton.
Mass Firearms School, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're pretty good too.
Okay. What type and how many firearms violations does the Westford Police Department see or handle annually?
Type in firearms violations, the majority of them are hunting complaints, hunting too close to a resident, discharge of a firearm, law says 500 feet, and people will call up and saying it's too close, and we would respond, find out where they are, and if they're properly licensed. That's the majority of the firearms. Secondary to that would be improper storage complaints. When we deal with a large amount of 209A, which is restraining order violations, and we go down to collect weapons, we find them not secured. So that's an issue.
Chief, if I could just add to that, and I think it's somewhat responsive to the question. I get a lot of calls from folks saying, can I keep your name in my phone, my phone directory in case I ever need to call you in the middle of the night because I had to shoot somebody? And I say, sure. But most of the cases in my office are improper storage cases. So statistically, you are more likely to get into a problem with legally and properly storing your firearms than you are in any kind of self-defense situation. So I can completely back up the chief's comments on that. Store your guns according to the law.
I have a follow-up to that. If gun owners' guns are seized for whatever reason, how can he or she get them back?
Well, under a 209A, that's usually what we're seizing them under. It's, we don't get, you're not gonna get them back until that order is vacated, or the guns are transferred to another licensed person, and that's usually what does happen. A licensed individual will come forward, the guns will be signed over to them and turned over for them for safekeeping.
Is there a time limit on that?
No. You know, we try to accommodate and get we don't want to hold on to your guns any longer than we have to.
Okay, another question. How do I dispose of unused, unwanted, obsolete ammunition?
We get it every week. That comes in. It hasn't, it has decreased.
Are you getting 22 caliber back?
We might have a few volunteers to help you out there.
It has decreased because of and I wasn't aware of this, because of the cost of ammunition has gone up through the roof, and people are reloading and I guess repurposing the ammunition. But we do get those in oddball rounds, the old stuff.
Yeah.
We do get that, and what we do is we ship it off to the state police to be destroyed.
Who's up? Other questions? Let's see, I think there's still some on our list. Does Westford have a gun safety problem? You may have touched on that, but you may ask the question specifically.
Well, do we have a problem with gun safety?
Yeah.
No, but I would like to see more education about gun safety. I think that's important. I think what Rick had said earlier about the early education about firearms, don't touch it, leave it, and notify an adult, that's spot on. But I don't think it's problematic. We don't get calls saying that there's a problem with it. So.
Here's one, the background is a little lengthy, but bear with me because I think it's a good question. It said, at Sunday's Memorial Day service, some of the children were scrambling to gather the spent brass from the blanks that were fired. My child picked up a couple shells. Fortunately, she was smart enough to know that she could not take them to school, as another child was almost expelled for bringing some to school last year. The question is there a way to create a safe environment where these things could be openly discussed without reprisal or concerns of expulsion?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think that's a school issue as far as the expulsion part of it. But technically, under Massachusetts law, ammunition, even casings, is considered ammunition.
Which you must be licensed to possess. So.
So they're in possession of ammunition components.
Just,
Another reasonable gun law.
yeah, I mean, hopefully our town hasn't experienced anything like this. I haven't read it. But there was actually a student in Palmer, Mass. On the school bus who initially he got suspended and now they've turned it into detention. He's a kindergartner. He had a Lego gun. It was smaller than a quarter. And the claim was that he caused terror amongst his busmates or something ridiculous like that. You know, that's taking it a bit too far in my opinion.
Can I ask a follow-up to that one? Is there any prohibition to educating kids about these issues in school? Are there any laws that prevent talking about these issues in school?
No, it's, I believe it's a policy issue with school committee, whether they want to do that. And Rick kind of alluded to the problem that he ran into, and the challenges that he ran into.
It's really like the last taboo. I think it's like, it's okay to talk with kids about anything except guns.
Did you, when you did this before, did you go through, I know you went through the school committee and everything, but did you start with the selectmen, or what did you start with?
I think we started with the superintendent, and then we had to go through we had to get permission from like 6 different places before we did it. And the kids had a great time. We got no complaints from the teachers. We got not one complaint from a parent, but it was just frustrating to not be able to continue to do that, because we're just interested in keeping kids safe. We want to make sure they know what to do if they come into a situation like that.
I promise you I will find out. I promise you, because I'll get an answer. You know, it may not be next week, but I mean, I certainly will make sure that everybody sees it, but I want to see that first. You know?
Well, all of you parents out there who are participating tonight and/or who might watch it when we eventually put this on CAT TV, if you call the school committee and say, hey, why don't you do this? You know, we have some
I think in all fairness, they need to see it first.
Sure.
To make sure that it's really age appropriate.
Sure.
You know, and that it works.
It's what it's designed for,
You know,
yeah.
you know, certainly if they can put in health education in town, this is something that, but in all fairness, they need to see that first.
Make phone
And I
calls.
didn't shy away from that, I promise you I won't shy away from that.
Here's a question. Can a license to carry, can a holder of a license to carry openly?
Well, there is no specific law in Massachusetts prohibiting open carry. However,
Say that again?
there is no law in Massachusetts that prohibits open carry. And
Provided you're licensed to carry.
providing your license to carry. And the, I think it was the state's attorney that, or the case where the Boston police officer was downgraded from an LTC-A to an LTC-B, the state's attorney actually argued that she could carry openly on that LTC-B. However, what would be your response, Chief, to a person calling up and saying somebody is openly carrying a firearm on their hip and I don't think that they're a cop?
They're gonna get checked out. It's as simple as that. You are gonna get confronted with a police officer and asked if you have a license to carry.
And if they're carrying openly, will that be the end of it, if they have a license to carry?
I don't think it would be a wise thing and it depends on as Matt was saying, it depends on the circumstances. Somebody walking into a mall openly carrying a weapon, I don't think that's a wise thing to do. I believe you're gonna get challenged. You could be technically, depending on what type of reaction you're receiving, be considered disorderly if it and alarming the public, and there are a lot of circumstances that go into that.
But again, it's not a good idea, it makes sense, but there's no, it's not like you lose your LTC if all of a sudden it just, you know what I'm saying, it gets seen or visibly, I mean, how is that?
No, that's
That's
different.
what I was asking, is it clear cut or is it?
But the chief may decide that you're no longer a suitable person.
Right, okay.
What I was told by the dealer when, the last time I purchased a handgun, was same answer. There is no prohibition against carrying openly. But if you do, you may well expect a concerned citizen to complain that he or she felt threatened by your presence, which leaves you open to arrest, and therefore confiscation of your guns.
I will say, speaking as a safety instructor, that we do not recommend open carry.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
In those cases. There are some situations where it occurs, most usually in hunting, for obvious reasons, but we don't recommend that.
As a woman who likes to dress comfortably, I would much prefer that we could open carry. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's hard to hide a gun, okay? So that's just,
That was my figure.
but keep in mind that there are a lot of states where open carry is the norm.
Yeah, well, New Hampshire being one.
New Hampshire being one, and they don't have a gun problem report, a violence problem.
So here's a neutrally phrased question. Why do you need these huge, powerful military weapons of mass destruction?
It came in via email, we had to have it.
Well, I think that we've already addressed the fact that these are not military-grade weapons. They're definitely not weapons of mass destruction. And as far as need goes,
I got a couple of comments. This question, I've heard this question, this comment, in a variety of places in the last several months. So what I like to do is I like to deconstruct questions like this and kind of tease out where the facts really are. So these large, I'm assuming we're talking about the AR-15 because it's a firearm that kind of looks like a military firearm. So first of all, is the firearm particularly large? The AR-15 fires a bullet that's 0.223 inches in diameter. Now, if you compare that to most other common rifles, most other rifles are somewhere around 30 caliber, the 30-06 and whatnot, typical hunting rifles. So it's actually about 25% smaller than the majority of the rifles that are out there. Powerful. The 223 is approximately, has what they call muzzle energy. That's the energy of that bullet coming out the end of the gun, of about 1,300 foot-pounds. To put that in perspective, if anybody here ever seen cowboy western movies? Yeah, okay. So John Wayne's got the good old-fashioned lever action, that's a Winchester 30-30. That's 2,000 foot-pounds. So it's not even as powerful as that. A 30-06 deer hunting rifle is probably about 2,800, 3,000 foot-pounds. And you can go far higher than that. The 460 Weatherby Magnum, if you're going to go off to Africa, is 7,500 plus foot-pounds. You know, I think that's where the misperception happens with the AR-15s and some of these more modern, what we call the modern sporting type rifles. So they're really actually a relatively small, not all that powerful, and non-military grade firearm. So the reality is that type of firearm for small game hunting, for target shooting, and quite frankly even for home self-defense is a very, very, very attractive type of firearm. So that's how I look at it. Therefore, when you look at it and say, well, do you need that? No, not necessarily, but I don't tell people what they need. Would they want it? Yeah, they probably would, given the characteristics of it. It's a very, very user-friendly firearm.
I think another way to answer it is to say, well, how many firemen and how many policemen does Westford really need? And do we really need armed policemen in Westford? Gee, now let's make a decision to disarm our policemen in Westford and hope nothing bad happens. Let's make a decision to just have 10 firemen and hope nothing bad happens. You know, it's a, you know, when the founders gave us this Constitution, they weren't thinking about deer hunting. They were thinking about the citizens' right to protect themselves from the ambitions of an overreaching government or an overreaching king. And we are the final defense of this Constitution. Us citizens, we.
yeah, the question of need strikes at people on a number of different levels. You know, I'm 5'3". I own a personal training company. I work out. I'm pretty physically fit. But the average man is going to be 7 inches or more taller than me, probably have close to 100 pounds on me. So what do I need for my personal protection? You know, you tell me how many rounds I'm gonna need on that day when that happens, and I'll be more than happy if you can assure me 120% that that's all I'm gonna need, then I'll take that. I think as Al said, that usually these questions are targeted around the AR-15, the modern sporting rifle, what some in the media like to call the assault weapons, or refer to them like that, the scary black rifles. These are great personal defense firearms. If you don't believe me, the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security states that they're a great personal defense weapon. That's why they just ordered something like 7,000 more of them. The Massachusetts State Police Training Manual actually says that an AR-15 style rifle is a great personal defense rifle. So, you know, along with that open carry thing, if we could openly carry, I would much prefer to openly carry a rifle versus a handgun. And I know Al's having a heart attack over here. Just because it's a more accurate firearm to defend oneself with. AR-15s are easily customizable for people my size versus my husband's a foot taller than me. So they definitely have their advantages for personal defense. Yeah.
With respect to the why, well, why not? There's a Supreme Court case out of from 2010 called the Heller decision. A number of you probably heard of it. And for the first time ever, the Supreme Court recognized that an individual has a right to possess a firearm as an individual right, as opposed to some other legal construction. And there's some interesting language in that decision that says that right of ownership applies to quote-unquote guns in common use, firearms in common use. Now, firearms in common use does not mean ubiquitous. It doesn't mean a lot of them. It means, can this firearm be used for a lawful purpose? So a firearm that has cosmetic characteristics similar to a firearm carried by the United States military, for example. Yeah, it has cosmetic characteristics that some people would think are inappropriate. But we see police departments, we see federal government, we see law enforcement agencies, we see civilian contracting, personal defense agencies, we see civilians in and of themselves utilizing these firearms every day for lawful purposes, be they for personal protection, sport, hunting, target shooting, competition, law enforcement. These are firearms that have a legitimate legal use. And so what it really means is why do we need these, I forget what the term was, but dangerous weapons of mass destruction?
That's close.
I think that's a bit of a stretch. In any case, these are firearms that have historically had a lawful purpose, a lawful use. And so to seek to ban them for no other reason than their appearance is frightening, not only flies in the face of the Second Amendment in general, but what the Supreme Court has said as recently as 2010.
Other questions? Anything else on?
A question to the chief. You know, I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm used to it.
So what, since this question is brought up, what is a standard complement that the average patrolman would have? What is the carrying on himself, for example, for arms and whatever?
Well, our officers, a standard issue would be a sidearm, what's a 6-hour 40 caliber weapon. It's a very reliable sidearm. And officers have to go through their training through the academy to qualify with it. They have to qualify both 2 times a year, mandatory. And the Mass Criminal Justice Training Council has just upped that training to 40 hours, an additional 40 hours every year for the officers. We also carry a shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun, both with slug rounds and double hot buck. And we also carry a AR-15.
Your AR-15s, are they select fire, burst fire, or just semi-auto?
They're semi-auto. We do have officers that are trained in burst, our SWAT officers are trained in that, and they don't carry that.
Other questions?
It might be worth discussing that the firearm in home defense is the final last decision, and it's the final last act. And then an awful lot of thought better be put into home defense about your alarm systems on the outside, your motion sensor alarms, what kind of doors you have, interior doors. There's a lot of interior doors that are hollow doors that can be kicked in, and those need to be replaced with a heavier door, so that if that thump in the night at 2 in the morning downstairs, you know, there's a couple of sturdy barriers between you and the thug that'll give you a little time to dial 911 and give you time to, with your shaking hand, to get that gun in your hand and then hope that you don't have to use it. So, I mean, and the emotional piece of that is you got to be thinking about that battle, because it is a battle. The minute you hear that thump downstairs, the minute you hear the glass breaking, you're in a battle. And you've got to think about it ahead of time, not at 2 in the morning.
And if I could add something to that, sir, taking those issues into consideration and executing them and following through consistently makes my job a whole lot easier. Because if you're ever in that situation, imagine your mindset, knowing that the individual in your house has defeated your alarm, has kicked in or somehow breached 2 of your reinforced doors, and you find yourself in a situation that this is somebody that really means to do me in, really means to do me harm. It is a whole lot easier to make the argument that you were in that reasonable fear for your life, knowing that you had done everything else that you possibly could have. Because I want to be able to stand up and say to the jury, this is somebody that did everything he possibly could to avoid this situation, and they still put him in that situation. Compare that to, well, I passed out drunk on the couch and forgot to close my front door, and I left my TV on and the lights on at 3 o'clock in the morning. Does that person have any less of a right to defend themselves? I would argue no. But how does your story play to the people that are going to be judging these circumstances? Be able to say, help me be able to say, I did everything that I possibly could to avoid this situation. And I think 90% of the problems will resolve themselves without having to take that shot.
I have one more here that says, recently I heard about one child shooting another on the national news. How does one prevent this?
Education.
Yeah, education. I'm guessing that was like that 4-year-old who, well, there were a couple of failures there. First and foremost, the adults who own those firearms should be held accountable, in my opinion. Before we ever brought a firearm into the house, we bought a safe that we knew that our son was not going to be able to get into. A very determined person with the correct tools would probably, and enough time, would be able to get into our safe. Nothing is 100%. So, you know, the adults first and foremost. And at the ages that we were talking about, I don't know that even education at that age is possible. I certainly don't think that my 4-year-old or my 6-year-old would have understood the consequences of not listening to the rules that time. We have a couch and a love seat in our home. And when my son was 4, he was jumping on the couch, and I told him no jumping on the couch. A few minutes later, I turned around, he's jumping on the love seat. And I said, I told you no jumping on the couch. He goes, I'm not on the couch. So, you know, so sometimes things don't translate at that age. So I would say that first and foremost, that the responsibility lies with the adults in that house.
As Dr. Phil would say, if you leave a loaded gun leaning against the wall with a 4-year-old in the room, how do you think that's going to turn out? I mean, to talk about stupidity, it was incredible. Anyway.
I think education is the key here, but for adults and age appropriate to children.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I think the adults need to be educated as much or if not more than, definitely more than the children, you know.
Well, we are just about out of time unless someone's got a last question, because I'm out of questions and we're out of time. But there's one more over here from the press.
From the press. If anybody couldn't make it here tonight, what's the best way for them to contact you if they have any questions that weren't addressed tonight?
Info. Go ahead.
Oh, I have the microphone.
Go ahead.
info@westfordpro2a.org.
Yep.
Info, INFO, at Westford Pro, the number 2, the letter A.org.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your great questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.